In June of 1940, Benito Mussolini stood before cheering crowds in Rome and declared war on Britain and France. For the Italian dictator, it was the perfect moment. France was collapsing under the Nazi Blitz, and Mussolini believed victory was already written. Italy would simply walk into the war and carve out its piece of the new world order, a Roman Empire reborn. That was the dream. But what followed was a series of embarrassing failures, disastrous campaigns in Greece and North Africa, troops marching with outdated weapons, and a growing dependence on Germany to clean up Italy's messes. Within just 3 years, Italy would collapse from within, switch sides, and become a battlefield torn between Nazis and Allied forces. So how did it go so wrong? In this episode of The Lost Chapter, we dive deep into the military missteps, strategic overconfidence, and structural weaknesses that doomed Mussolini's ambitions from the start. Because Italy didn't just lose the war, it barely made it out of its own opening act. If you're enjoying these forgotten turns in history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us every week for more untold chapters. When Mussolini entered World War II, he did so with supreme confidence and dangerously little preparation. In fact, he had actively kept Italy out of the war for 9 months after it began in 1939. But in June of 1940, with France on the brink of defeat, Mussolini thought the moment had come. He wanted Italy to sit at the winner's table, without doing much of the fighting. But Mussolini wasn't just trying to support Germany. He had imperial ambitions of his own. He dreamed of a new Roman Empire, stretching across the Mediterranean. And to him, war was the shortcut. That dream had been simmering for decades. Italy had been humiliated in the Battle of Adwa in 1896, when Ethiopian forces, under Emperor Menelik II, soundly defeated an invading Italian army. Mussolini never forgot that loss. In 1935, 5 years before World War II began, he ordered the invasion of Ethiopia again, this time with modern tanks, airplanes, and poison gas. It worked on paper. Italy seized the country, but the brutal occupation sparked resistance movements and stretched Italian supply lines. The cracks were already showing. Still, Mussolini learned the wrong lesson, that military force could solve Italy's insecurities. He followed the Ethiopia invasion with another risky move, launching an unprovoked attack on Greece in 1940. Confident it would fall in weeks, he sent poorly trained troops into mountainous terrain during winter without proper gear. The Greek campaign quickly turned into a disaster. Not only did the Greeks push Italian forces back into Albania, but Hitler had to intervene, delaying Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union by weeks. Mussolini's vanity had strategic costs for the entire Axis. From the start, Mussolini made decisions based on glory, not readiness, and that disconnect would only deepen as the war escalated. While Mussolini's speeches promised a powerful Italy, the reality on the ground was far different. Italy's military, in terms of equipment, training, and leadership, was woefully underprepared for a modern global conflict. Let's start with equipment. Many Italian soldiers went into battle with rifles that were decades old. Tanks were lightly armored and undergunned compared to their British or German counterparts. Italian aircraft, like the Fiat CR-42 biplane, looked outdated next to the sleek, fast monoplane fighters of other nations. Even basic supplies like boots, winter coats, or reliable ammunition were often in short supply. In North Africa, Italian troops found themselves outmatched by British Commonwealth forces in nearly every engagement. At battles like Beta Fam in early 1941, entire Italian divisions surrendered, not because they lacked courage, but because they were stranded without fuel or support. British General Richard O'Connor famously captured over 130,000 Italian troops in just a few months, with a much smaller force. The problems weren't just material. Italy's military leadership was outdated and divided. Many high-ranking officers owed their positions to political loyalty rather than skill. Coordination between the army, navy, and air force was almost non-existent. For example, Italian naval forces, which could have threatened British supply lines in the Mediterranean, were kept on a tight leash and rarely given permission to act aggressively. Meanwhile, the Air Force often failed to provide support to ground troops when it mattered most. Morale was another invisible casualty. Italian soldiers were fighting in unfamiliar places, from the deserts of Libya to the mountains of Greece, without clear objectives or strong leadership. Many were conscripts who had no faith in the cause, no hope of victory, and no confidence in their commanders. Despite Mussolini's bluster, Italy wasn't ready for war, and each defeat on the battlefield only exposed how deep those weaknesses ran. As Italy's military failures piled up, Germany was forced to step in, again and again. What had begun as a partnership between Axis powers quickly turned into something more like dependency. After Italy's invasion of Greece collapsed into retreat, Hitler had no choice but to send in the Wehrmacht, the unified armed forces of Nazi Germany. The operation succeeded militarily, but it delayed Operation Barbarossa, Germany's massive invasion of the Soviet Union, by critical weeks. Some historians argue that the delay pushed the German army into the brutal Russian winter without proper gear or positioning. It's impossible to say if this directly cost Germany the Eastern Front, but the timing didn't help. In North Africa, things weren't much better. Italy's push toward Egypt ended in humiliation, and Hitler dispatched General Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, to salvage the situation. Rommel's Africa Corps was well-trained and effective, but even he complained about Italy's lack of coordination and poor logistics. He wasn't just fighting the British. He was dragging Italy's army with him. The pattern was clear. Wherever Italy advanced, it faltered. And wherever it faltered, Germany had to rescue it. This imbalance strained the Axis alliance. Hitler didn't fully trust Mussolini, and Mussolini didn't want to be seen as Hitler's junior, even though in practice he was. Germany bore the weight of most major offensives, while Italy stumbled through secondary theaters and diversionary campaigns. Even in places where Italy might have succeeded, such as the Balkans or North Africa, the lack of planning, unreliable equipment, and poor troop morale made sustained victories impossible. By 1942, Mussolini was becoming a liability. Italy's defeats were not only weakening the Axis, but also encouraging the Allies. Churchill saw Italy as the soft underbelly of Europe, a vulnerable entry point into the continent, and he was right. As Italy's military campaigns unraveled abroad, pressure mounted at home. Bombings, rationing, and mounting casualties eroded public support for the war. Mussolini's grip on power began to slip, not because of Allied guns, but because of hunger, fear, and disillusionment inside his own country. By 1943, Italy was teetering. Cities like Milan and Naples were being hit by Allied air raids. Food shortages and inflation were fueling unrest. Even within the government and royal court, voices were beginning to question Mussolini's leadership. Then came the final blow, the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943. The operation was swift and brutal. American and British forces took the island in just over a month. Mussolini had no answers. On July 25, 1943, Mussolini was summoned by King Victor Emmanuel III and promptly dismissed. He was arrested and replaced by Marshal Pietro Badoglio, who secretly opened negotiations with the Allies. On September 8th, Italy signed an armistice with the Allies, but chaos followed. Germany, furious at what they saw as betrayal, launched Operation Oxa and occupied northern and central Italy. Mussolini was freed by German commandos and installed as the head of a puppet state, the Italian Social Republic. But Italy was no longer a sovereign power. The country was now split in two, the south under Allied control, the north under Nazi rule, and the people caught in the middle of a brutal civil war. Italian partisans, ordinary citizens turned resistance fighters, now waged guerrilla war against the German occupiers and Mussolini's fascist remnants. The war in Italy would grind on until 1945, long after Mussolini's dreams of empire had turned to rubble. Italy's failures weren't just national embarrassments. They had worldwide consequences. First, Mussolini's reckless invasion of Greece in 1940 forced Hitler to divert German forces to the Balkans, delaying the invasion of the Soviet Union. That delay may have contributed to Germany's failure to take Moscow before the Russian winter, a turning point in the war. Second, Italy's weakness created an opening for the Allies. Churchill correctly identified Italy as the soft underbelly of Europe. The invasion of Sicily in 1943 and the subsequent collapse of Mussolini's regime gave the Allies a foothold in continental Europe, months before the D-Day landings in Normandy. Third, Italy's internal resistance, from partisans in the mountains to citizens sabotaging railways and communications, drained German resources and helped shorten the war. Italy may have entered World War II as an Axis power, but it ended the conflict with a civil war that helped bleed Nazi strength from within. And finally, Italy's downfall served as a cautionary tale that ambition without preparation is a recipe for disaster. Mussolini wanted an empire. What he got was occupation, division, and ruin. Italy's failure in World War II wasn't a fluke. It was the result of arrogance, poor planning, and blind faith in military glory over military readiness. From the deserts of North Africa to the mountains of Greece, Italian soldiers paid the price for a dictator's delusions. And while Germany carried the weight of the Axis war machine, it was Mussolini's blunders that helped open cracks in the foundation. The legacy? A war-torn nation, a deposed dictator, and a haunting lesson in the cost of overreach. Thanks for watching The Lost Chapter. If you found this story eye-opening, stay tuned, because next time we'll explore how one small African nation defied colonial conquest and became a symbol of resistance. Like, subscribe, and join us again next time. The Lost Chapter. Forgotten history, unforgettable stories.